I woke up at dawn to check my bank balance before my morning coffee ritual. The screen showed negative $540,000. My heart stopped. I refreshed 3 times, certain it was an error. Then my phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Jessica. "Thanks for the house and the car, Mom. Finally moving out of that cramped apartment. Love you." My hand shook as I realized my precious daughter had somehow accessed my deceased husband's trust fund account. The account Jessica wasn't supposed to know existed until my death. I sat in my kitchen staring at that impossible number on my phone screen, watching the morning sunlight stream through my window like it was just another ordinary Tuesday. But nothing about this day felt ordinary anymore. $540,000 doesn't just vanish overnight, and my daughter Jessica doesn't just buy houses without telling me. Let me tell you about Jessica. She's 28 now, my only child, and for the past 3 years since her father Frank passed from cancer, she's been my anchor. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, she'd show up at my front door with a thermos of homemade chicken soup and stories from her job at Dr. Peterson's dental office. She'd sit right there at my kitchen table, telling me about difficult patients and office gossip, her brown hair always pulled back in that neat ponytail she's worn since high school. Jessica lives modestly, or at least that's what I thought. She rents a tiny 1-bedroom apartment on Elm Street, drives a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a dented bumper, and clips coupons like her grandmother used to do. When Frank died, I gave her access to one of my checking accounts for emergencies only. The account had maybe $3,000 in it. Enough for a car repair or medical bill, not enough to buy property. So how did she get into Frank's trust fund? That account required specific authorization codes that only my estate attorney and I possessed. The bank manager had assured me it was completely secure when we set it up after Frank's diagnosis. The money was meant to be Jessica's inheritance, but not until I passed away or she turned 30, whichever came first. I threw on my clothes and drove straight to Jessica's apartment complex on Elm Street. My stomach churned as I climbed those familiar stairs to her second-floor unit. I'd been there dozens of times helping her hang pictures and bringing her leftover casseroles. But when I knocked on apartment 212, a stranger answered. "Can I help you?" asked a young man with paint-stained fingers. "I'm looking for Jessica Hartwell," I said, my voice barely steady. He scratched his head. "Lady nobody by that name lives here. I moved in 6 months ago when the place became available." 6 months. Jessica had been lying to me for 6 months. I found the building manager, Mrs. Chen, watering plants by the mailboxes. She knew me from my visits and smiled warmly until she saw my expression. "Oh, Darby, how nice to see you. Are you looking for Jessica? She moved out last fall after her wedding. Such a lovely girl. Her husband seemed like a real catch, driving that fancy BMW and all." Wedding. The word hit me like a physical blow. Jessica was married and hadn't told me. My daughter, who used to share every detail of her life, who called me whenever she had a bad day at work or watched a sad movie, had gotten married without inviting her own mother. "Did you happen to catch the husband's name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Trevor something. Blackstone. I think he helped her move out. Very charming fellow, always complimenting my flower arrangements." I thanked Mrs. Chen and walked back to my car on unsteady legs. Trevor Blackstone. I'd never heard Jessica mention anyone by that name. In fact, the last time we'd talked about her dating life, she'd complained about being single and how all the good men were taken. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Marcus Walsh, a retired detective I'd met at Frank's support group meetings. Marcus had helped another widow in our group track down someone who'd been stealing her late husband's identity. He was expensive, but if my daughter was in trouble or worse, if she was playing me for a fool, I needed to know the truth. "Darby, I'll be honest with you. Marcus said when I explained the situation. This kind of financial access doesn't happen by accident. Either your daughter is a victim of identity theft, or she's involved in something deeper than you realize. Within 48 hours, Marcus had information that made my blood run cold. Trevor Blackstone, age 32, had a criminal record spanning 3 states: financial fraud, elder abuse, identity theft. He'd convinced 2 previous girlfriends to steal from their families. One case in Nevada involved a woman who drained her grandmother's retirement account. Another in Colorado targeted a young mother who emptied her deceased father's estate. But the worst part was yet to come. Marcus showed me Jessica's marriage certificate dated 8 months ago. She'd been lying about being single, lying about where she lived, and apparently lying about the kind of person she'd become. "There's something else," Marcus said, sliding another document across his desk. "Hospital records show your daughter is pregnant, about 4 months along." Pregnant. My daughter was having a baby, and I was finding out from a private investigator instead of from her own lips. The betrayal cut deeper than the stolen money. This wasn't just about cash anymore. This was about family trust, and the grandbaby I didn't even know existed. That evening, I called Jessica's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and cheerful like always. "Hi, Mom, how are you feeling today?" "Oh, sweetie, I'm a bit confused," I said, forcing myself to sound helpless rather than furious. "There seems to be some kind of banking error. My account is showing strange numbers." I heard Jessica's sharp intake of breath. "What kind of strange numbers?" "Well, it looks like a lot of money went somewhere, but I'm sure it's just a computer glitch. You know how these banks are with their technology. I can barely operate my smartphone, let alone understand their systems." "Mom." Jessica's voice was smaller now, almost childlike. "I need to tell you something." And that's when she broke down crying. Through her sobs, she told me she was scared that she'd made a terrible mistake, that Trevor had convinced her the money was rightfully hers anyway since Dad was gone. She said Trevor told her I was hoarding money that should go to their baby's future, that I was being selfish, keeping so much when they could barely afford rent. But between her tears, I heard something else. Fear. Real bone-deep terror in my daughter's voice when she mentioned Trevor's name. "Jessica," I said gently, "where are you living now? I tried to visit your apartment, but—" "We bought a house," she whispered. "In Maplewood Heights. Trevor said we needed space for the baby and that you'd understand once you met him properly. Maplewood Heights, the most expensive suburb in our county, where houses started at $500,000. My stolen money had bought them quite the upgrade." "I'd love to see it," I said, swallowing my rage. "And meet this Trevor fellow. He sounds wonderful." "Oh, Mom, I don't know if that's a good idea right now. Trevor's been so stressed with work and the house is still a mess from moving." More lies, but I could hear the panic in her voice. She was making excuses because she was afraid, not because she was trying to deceive me. For the first time since seeing that bank balance, I wondered if my daughter might be as much a victim in this as I was. "How about lunch tomorrow instead?" I suggested. "Just you and me like old times. I miss our conversations." Jessica agreed, relief evident in her voice. After we hung up, I sat in Frank's old chair and tried to process everything I'd learned. My daughter had been manipulated into stealing from me by a man with a history of targeting families just like ours. She was pregnant, scared, and trapped in a situation that was spiraling beyond her control. But here's what Trevor Blackstone didn't know about me. I hadn't survived 42 years of marriage, raised a daughter, and nursed my husband through cancer by being a helpless old woman. Frank always said I had a core of steel wrapped in Southern charm. Tomorrow, I was going to start using both. I spent that sleepless night planning my approach like Frank used to strategize his business deals. By morning, I had transformed from grieving victim into calculating strategist. The first rule of warfare, Frank always said, is never let your enemy know what you're really thinking. Jessica chose a small cafe on Maple Street for our lunch meeting, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and servers who call you honey. She arrived 10 minutes early, fidgeting with her purse strap and glancing toward the door every few seconds. When I walked in wearing my best concerned mother expression, her shoulders sagged with what looked like relief. "Mom!" She stood to hug me, and that's when I felt it. The small but unmistakable curve of her belly pressed against me. My grandbaby growing inside a daughter who was trapped in a nightmare she didn't fully understand yet. "You look tired, sweetheart," I said, settling into the booth across from her. "Are you feeling all right?" Jessica's hand moved instinctively to her stomach before she caught herself. "Just work stress. Dr. Peterson has us booked solid with holiday patients wanting cleanings before their insurance changes." Another lie. Marcus had already confirmed that Jessica hadn't worked at the dental office for 3 months. Dr. Peterson's receptionist told him Jessica had quit suddenly, claiming family obligations. "Well, don't you worry about this banking nonsense," I said, stirring sugar into my coffee. "I'm sure it's just some computer error. These modern systems are so complicated. Remember how your father used to joke that I couldn't program the VCR?" Jessica's laugh sounded forced. "Mom, about the banking thing, I need to tell you something." "Oh, honey, what is it?" "Trevor and I—" She took a shaky breath. "We used some money from one of your accounts for a house down payment. Trevor said it would be like an advance on my inheritance, and we'd pay it back once his promotion comes through." I reached across the table and patted her hand like a naive old woman would. "An advance. Well, I suppose that makes sense. Your father always said family should help family. Tell me about this house of yours. I'm so excited to see where my grandchild will grow up." The word grandchild made Jessica freeze. "You know about the baby." "Oh, sweetie, a mother can tell these things. You're glowing, and you keep touching your tummy. I'm going to be a grandmother." I infused my voice with pure joy, though inside, I was cataloging every flicker of fear that crossed her face. "Mom, I wanted to tell you, but Trevor thought we should wait until the second trimester to be safe." "Trevor sounds very thoughtful." I lied smoothly. When do I get to meet this wonderful man who's making my daughter so happy? Jessica's face crumpled. "Mom, I'm scared." There it was. The truth she'd been hiding behind all those fabrications. "Scared of what, baby girl?" "I think I made a mistake. A huge mistake. Trevor said the money thing would be simple, just a temporary loan, but now he's talking about investments and overseas accounts and things I don't understand. And when I ask questions, he gets so angry." She rolled up her sleeves to reach for her water glass, and I saw them. Fingerprint-shaped bruises on her upper arms, still purple around the edges. My blood turned to ice, but I kept my voice gentle. "Honey, those look like they hurt. Did you fall?" Jessica quickly pulled her sleeves back down. "I'm just clumsy with the pregnancy. You know how that is?" I knew exactly what that was, and it wasn't clumsiness. Trevor Blackstone wasn't just a financial predator. He was abusing my pregnant daughter. "Why don't you bring Trevor to dinner this Sunday?" I suggested. "I'll make that pot roast you love, and we can all get acquainted properly." "Oh, Mom, I don't think that's possible. Trevor works weekends, and the house needs so much work." More deflection, more fear. Jessica was protecting Trevor probably because she was afraid of what he'd do if she didn't. After lunch, I drove straight to Marcus's office. "We need to accelerate this investigation," I told him. "My daughter is in physical danger." Marcus had been busy too. "I've got more information on Trevor, and none of it's good. His real name is Robert Maxwell. He's wanted for questioning in Arizona regarding the suspicious death of an elderly woman whose granddaughter he was dating. The girl claimed the grandmother fell downstairs, but the family suspected foul play. What happened to the girl? Car accident 3 months later, single vehicle rural mountain road. Police ruled it accidental, but the timing raised eyebrows. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Trevor seduced vulnerable women, convinced them to steal from family members, then eliminated them once he had what he needed. Jessica wasn't just a victim of financial fraud. She was in line to be his next murder victim. "We need federal involvement," I said. "This crosses state lines and if there are potential homicides." "Already on it. I've got a contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Sarah Rodriguez has been tracking similar cases. She's very interested in what we've uncovered." That afternoon, I met Detective Rodriguez at a coffee shop downtown. She was younger than I'd expected, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of my own daughter before Trevor got his hooks into her. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'll be direct with you. We've been investigating Robert Maxwell, aka Trevor Blackstone, for 18 months. He's sophisticated, careful, and dangerous. Your daughter's case could be the break we need to build a federal prosecution, but only if she's willing to cooperate." "She's scared of him. He's been hitting her." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "We suspected domestic violence based on previous patterns. The problem is victims in these situations often protect their abusers, especially when they're pregnant and financially dependent. What if I could get him to incriminate himself on recording? That would be extremely valuable, but also extremely dangerous. If he suspects you're onto him..." "Detective, I didn't survive being a military wife, raising a child alone while my husband was deployed, and nursing him through terminal cancer just to lose my daughter to a two-bit con man. What do you need me to do?" Rodriguez studied my face for a long moment. "Let's talk about wearing a wire." That evening, I called Jessica and played my role perfectly. "Sweetheart, I've been thinking about our conversation today. You mentioned Trevor needs money for investments. Well, I remembered your father had another account I'd completely forgotten about. It's got about $50,000 in it, just sitting there earning minimal interest. Maybe Trevor could use it for one of his business ventures." Mom, you don't need to do that." "Nonsense. It's just money gathering dust in your family. Besides, I'd love to meet this brilliant businessman who swept my daughter off her feet. Maybe he could give an old lady some investment advice." I could hear Trevor's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. Jessica covered the phone, but I caught fragments. "What did she say? And how much?" When Jessica came back on the line, her voice was strained but hopeful. "Trevor says he'd be happy to meet you. Maybe this weekend." "Wonderful, I'll cook and we can make it a proper family dinner." After hanging up, I sat in Frank's chair and touched the small recording device Detective Rodriguez had given me. It was smaller than a button, designed to be sewn into clothing and virtually undetectable. "Frank," I thought, looking at his photograph on the mantel, "I hope I'm strong enough for what's coming." The next morning, Marcus called with news that changed everything. "I've been digging deeper into Trevor's recent activities. Darby, the money he stole from you, it's already moving through offshore accounts. But that's not the worst part." "What could be worse?" "I found evidence that he's been researching your daughter's life insurance policy, the one from her job at the dental office. It's still active even though she quit, and guess who she recently added as the beneficiary? Trevor wasn't just planning to steal my money and disappear. He was planning to kill Jessica and collect on her life insurance too. The baby she was carrying was just another obstacle to be eliminated." But Trevor had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated a mother's love and a widow's determination. He thought he was dealing with a confused old woman who'd hand over her life savings without a fight. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I prepared for the most important performance of my life. Detective Rodriguez had briefed me thoroughly on what to watch, for what questions to ask, and how to get Trevor talking without seeming suspicious. The recording device was sewn into the lining of my cardigan, and my phone had been equipped with software that would transmit everything to the FBI in real time. But before Trevor arrived, I had one more piece of this puzzle to put in place. I called my estate attorney, Patricia Mills, and asked her to meet me at her office for an emergency consultation. Patricia had been Frank's lawyer for 20 years, a sharp woman in her 60s who wore elegant suits and had a reputation for being absolutely thorough. When I explained what had happened, her face went through several shades of pale. "Darby, I need you to understand something very important about Frank's trust fund setup," she said, pulling out a thick file. "The account Jessica accessed wasn't just your money. It was specifically structured as her inheritance with very strict legal conditions." She opened the file and showed me documents I'd signed 3 years ago when Frank was dying. Frank was worried about Jessica's financial future, but he was also concerned about her judgment. That's why we included this forfeiture clause. "What kind of forfeiture clause?" Patricia pointed to a paragraph buried in legal language. "If Jessica attempts to access the trust fund through fraudulent means before the specified conditions are met, she automatically forfeits any legal claim to the entire inheritance. Not just the money she took, but everything Frank intended to leave her." The implications hit me like a thunderbolt. "You're saying Jessica has stolen her own inheritance?" "Technically, yes. And because the theft was accomplished through identity fraud and unauthorized access, she's also committed federal crimes that would make her ineligible to inherit, even if the forfeiture clause didn't exist. But she didn't know about the trust fund. Trevor manipulated her into this." "That may be true, but legally, ignorance isn't a defense for felony theft. However," Patricia leaned forward, "there is a provision for cases of coercion or undue influence. If we can prove Jessica was manipulated by someone with criminal intent, and if she cooperates fully with authorities, the forfeiture could potentially be waived." This added a whole new layer to my strategy. I wasn't just trying to get my money back and protect Jessica from Trevor. I was trying to save her legal right to her father's legacy. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I watched a black BMW park behind Jessica's old Honda. Trevor Blackstone stepped out, and I got my first look at the man who had destroyed my family's trust. He was handsome in a calculated way, with perfectly styled dark hair and clothes that probably cost more than Jessica used to make in a month. But it was his eyes that chilled me, cold assessing like a predator evaluating prey. When Jessica got out of the passenger side, I noticed she moved carefully as if she was sore. I opened the door with my biggest smile. "You must be Trevor, I'm Darby, and I'm so excited to finally meet the man who makes my daughter so happy." Trevor's handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "Mrs. Hartwell, the pleasure is all mine. Jessica talks about you constantly." Another lie. If Jessica had been talking about me constantly, he'd have known I was nobody's fool. "Please come in, I've made pot roast Jessica's favorite." During dinner, I played the role of doting mother and naive widow perfectly. I asked Trevor about his work and listened with apparent fascination as he spun elaborate tales about international investments and cutting-edge technology ventures. "It sounds so complicated," I said, dabbing at my mouth with a napkin. "I don't understand any of that modern business stuff. Frank handled all our finances, and since he's been gone, I just let the bank manage everything." Trevor leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with interest. "You know, Mrs. Hartwell, banks are terrible with investment management. They're far too conservative. A woman in your position could be earning so much more with the right guidance." "Really, how much more?" "Well, that depends on what kind of assets we're talking about. Jessica mentioned you have some additional accounts that aren't being properly utilized." Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Trevor, maybe we shouldn't." "Nonsense, sweetheart. Your mother asked me to help, and I'm happy to provide professional advice to family." I excused myself to get dessert, and while in the kitchen, I heard their voices through the thin wall. Trevor's tone had changed completely when he thought I couldn't hear. "Did you tell her about the other account or not?" "I mentioned it, but Mom seemed confused about what account she even has." "Jesus, Jessica, this is important. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with here. The house payment is just the beginning." "Trevor, I'm scared. What if we get caught? What if Mom finds out what we really did?" "We won't get caught if you stop acting guilty and stick to the plan. Your mother is old and confused. She trusts you completely. All you have to do is keep playing the loving daughter while I handle the business side." I returned with apple pie, my hands steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "I hope you saved room for dessert." For the next hour, Trevor systematically extracted information about my financial situation. I fed him carefully crafted lies mixed with just enough truth to keep him interested. Yes, Frank had left me well provided for. Yes, there were accounts I didn't fully understand. Yes, I'd be grateful for professional help managing everything. By the time they left, Trevor was convinced he'd found his next big score. He had no idea he'd just confessed to multiple federal crimes while being recorded by the FBI. But the evening had revealed something else equally important. As I walked them to their car, Jessica hugged me goodbye and I felt her trembling. "Mom," she whispered in my ear so quietly Trevor couldn't hear, "I think I'm in trouble. Real trouble." "What kind of trouble, baby?" She glanced toward Trevor, who was checking his phone by the car. "I found some papers in his briefcase. Research about life insurance policies and accidents. Mom, I think he's planning to hurt me." My blood turned to ice water, but I kept my voice calm. "Come see me tomorrow while Trevor's at work. We'll figure this out together." "I can't. He doesn't let me drive anywhere alone anymore. He says it's because of the pregnancy, but..." "But what?" "But he's been giving me vitamins that make me dizzy. I looked them up online, Mom. They're not vitamins." Trevor appeared beside us. "Ready to go, babe. We've got that early appointment tomorrow, remember?" Jessica nodded quickly, fear flickering across her face. As I watched them drive away, I realized that time was running out faster than I'd thought. Trevor wasn't just planning Jessica's eventual murder. Based on what she'd just told me, he was already putting that plan into motion. I called Detective Rodriguez as soon as their taillights disappeared. "We need to accelerate everything," I told her. "He's already started poisoning her." "What do you mean?" I repeated what Jessica had told me about the fake vitamins. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Hartwell, we've seen this before in the Arizona case. The victim's family said she'd been complaining of dizziness and nausea for weeks before her supposed accident. We never could prove what he was giving her, but..." "But you think he killed her?" "I think Robert Maxwell is extremely dangerous, and your daughter's pregnancy makes her even more vulnerable. A pregnant woman's death can easily be explained as a medical emergency or accident." "What do we do?" "We spring the trap early. How quickly can you set up another meeting?" "I'll call Jessica tomorrow and tell her about that additional $50,000 I mentioned. Trevor won't be able to resist." "Be careful, Darby. If he suspects you're onto him..." "He won't. Trevor Blackstone thinks he's the smartest person in the room. That arrogance is going to be his downfall." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen and looked at the photos of Jessica that covered my refrigerator. Baby pictures, school photos, her high school graduation, the day she got her first job. In every single one, she was smiling. Trevor had stolen that smile along with my money, but I was going to make sure he never hurt another family again. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Sunday morning, I called Jessica while Trevor was supposedly at his weekly golf game. In reality, Marcus had been following him, and Trevor spent his Sundays at a sports bar in the next county, probably meeting with other criminals or researching his next victim. "Sweetheart, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I said, injecting excitement into my voice. Remember how I mentioned forgetting about one of your father's accounts? Well, I found the paperwork. There's $50,000 just sitting there earning practically nothing. Jessica's voice was weak, probably from whatever Trevor was poisoning her with. Mom, you don't need to worry about that. We're fine. Nonsense, Frank would want his grandbaby to have every advantage. Besides, Trevor seems so knowledgeable about investments. I'd love his professional opinion on what to do with the money. I could hear the internal struggle in Jessica's voice. She knew this was wrong, but she was also terrified of disappointing Trevor. Maybe we could meet for coffee this week, she suggested hesitantly. Actually, why don't you both come by Wednesday evening? I'll order pizza and Trevor can look at the account information properly. I have so many questions about investing and financial planning. When Jessica called back an hour later, I could hear the excitement in Trevor's voice in the background. He'd taken the bait completely. Trevor says Wednesday works perfectly, Jessica said. He's really looking forward to helping you with your financial planning. After hanging up, I called Detective Rodriguez. It's set for Wednesday. Are you ready? More than ready. We've been building the case file, and what we have so far is impressive. Wire fraud across state lines, identity theft, elder financial abuse, and now evidence of domestic violence and potential attempted murder. When we arrest him, he's looking at 25 to life in federal prison. What about Jessica? What kind of legal trouble is she in? That depends entirely on her cooperation. If she testifies against Trevor and provides evidence of coercion, the prosecutor might offer complete immunity. The key is proving she was manipulated and threatened rather than being a willing participant. Wednesday evening arrived with the kind of cold rain that chills you to the bone. I'd prepared for this meeting like a general preparing for battle. The FBI had upgraded my recording equipment and positioned surveillance teams around my neighborhood. If things went wrong, help would be seconds away. Jessica and Trevor arrived at 6:30, and I immediately noticed the change in my daughter's appearance. She looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that worried me. Whatever Trevor was giving her was definitely taking its toll. Mom, you look wonderful. Jessica hugged me, and I felt how thin she'd become. The pregnancy should have been filling her out, but instead she seemed to be wasting away. Trevor was all business, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of confident smile that had probably charmed dozens of victims. Mrs. Hartwell, I brought some materials to help explain your investment options. I think you're going to be very excited about the possibilities. Over pizza, Trevor launched into his presentation. He had charts, graphs, and official-looking documents that were probably complete fabrications. He talked about overseas markets, cryptocurrency investments, and something called private equity opportunities that required immediate action to take advantage of market conditions. The key is speed. Trevor explained, spreading papers across my kitchen table. These opportunities don't last long. If you wait too long to make a decision, you could miss out on substantial returns. Classic high-pressure sales tactics. Create urgency so the victim doesn't have time to think or seek outside advice. It sounds wonderful, but so complicated, I said, playing confused. How would I even access that kind of money? Frank set up all these accounts with passwords and security measures I don't understand. Trevor leaned forward like a shark sensing blood in the water. That's where I can help. With your permission, I can handle all the technical aspects. You just need to sign a few authorization forms and I'll take care of everything else. He produced a stack of documents from his briefcase. Transfer authorizations, power of attorney forms, investment agreements, all designed to give him complete control over my remaining assets. I don't know, I said, looking uncertain. This seems like a lot to process. Maybe I should talk to my bank first. Jessica spoke up for the first time all evening. Mom, Trevor really knows what he's doing. He's helped other families maximize their investments. The words sounded rehearsed like Trevor had coached her on what to say, but I caught the pleading look in her eyes. She wasn't trying to convince me. She was trying to warn me.
Well, if you think it's best.
I reached for one of the forms and Trevor's face lit up with triumph. That's when I dropped my act. Actually, Trevor, I have some questions about your previous investment successes. Tell me about your work with elderly clients in Nevada and Colorado. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Trevor's confident smile froze, and Jessica looked confused. I'm not sure what you mean, Mrs. Hartwell. Oh, I think you do. Robert Maxwell, isn't it? Or do you prefer Robert? I know Trevor Blackstone is just one of your many aliases. Jessica gasped. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about your husband's real identity, sweetheart. He's a career criminal who specializes in financial fraud against elderly victims and their families. Trevor stood up slowly, his charming mask finally slipping to reveal the predator underneath. You don't know what you're playing with, old woman. Don't I? I know about Nevada, Colorado, and Arizona. I know about the grandmother who supposedly fell down the stairs and the young mother who died in that convenient car accident. I know about the fake vitamins you've been giving my pregnant daughter. Jessica's face went white. Fake vitamins. Trevor, what is she talking about? She's talking about lies, baby. Your mother's been listening to conspiracy theories. But Jessica was looking at Trevor with new eyes, and the fear I'd been seeing was transforming into something else. Understanding and fury. The dizziness, Jessica said slowly. The nausea that's gotten worse instead of better. The headaches. Those aren't pregnancy symptoms, are they? Trevor's composure cracked completely. Jessica, don't listen to her. She's trying to break us up because she's jealous of our happiness. Show her the life insurance research, Trevor, I said calmly. Show her the papers she found in your briefcase about accidents and remote mountain roads. Jessica stood up so fast her chair fell over. You've been planning to kill me. Baby, no, it's not what you think. Then explain it. Jessica's voice rose to nearly a shout. Explain why you've been researching my life insurance. Explain why the vitamins you give me aren't available in any pharmacy. Explain why you won't let me drive alone or see my friends or go anywhere without you. Trevor looked like a cornered animal. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The people I owe money to. This was supposed to be simple. Simple. Jessica laughed, but it was a sound without humor. Murdering your pregnant wife is simple. The pregnancy was an accident. It complicated everything. Do you know how hard it is to stage a believable accident when someone's pregnant? The room went dead silent. Trevor had just confessed to planning murder, and Jessica was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. That's when Trevor made his final desperate play. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife. Nobody's going anywhere until we figure this out, he said, his voice deadly calm. Jessica, you're going to call your mother's bank right now and transfer that $50,000. Then we're all going to take a nice drive to discuss our family's future. But Trevor had made a critical error. He'd underestimated both the women in that room. Jessica looked at the knife, then at me, then back at Trevor. When she spoke, her voice was steady and strong. No. What did you say? I said no. I'm not calling anyone, I'm not transferring anything, and I'm definitely not going anywhere with you. Trevor lunged toward Jessica with the knife, but he'd forgotten something important. Jessica was Frank Hartwell's daughter, and Frank had taught both his girls how to defend themselves. My daughter sidestepped Trevor's attack with a grace that would have made her father proud, grabbed his wrist and twisted until he dropped the knife. Then she used a move Frank had drilled into her since she was 16, sweeping Trevor's legs and sending him crashing to the floor. That's when my kitchen filled with FBI agents who'd been monitoring everything through my recording equipment. Detective Rodriguez cuffed Trevor while he was still stunned on my linoleum floor. Robert Maxwell, You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit murder, and domestic violence. You have the right to remain silent." As they led Trevor away, he looked back at Jessica with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've just done. You'll never be safe. Never." But Jessica stood tall, one hand on her belly, protecting her baby, the other holding the knife Trevor had threatened us with. "Actually," she said, "I know exactly what I've done. I've saved my family." The trap had worked perfectly. But the real victory wasn't catching Trevor. It was watching my daughter rediscover her strength and her voice. The scared, manipulated woman who'd walked into my kitchen was gone. In her place stood a fierce mother-to-be who'd fought back and won. The hours after Trevor's arrest passed in a blur of police interviews, evidence collection, and medical examinations. Detective Rodriguez had insisted Jessica go to the hospital immediately to be checked for drug poisoning, and the results confirmed our worst fears. "Mrs. Hartwell, your daughter has been systematically poisoned with a combination of prescription medications," Dr. Amanda Foster explained as we sat in the hospital waiting room. "Sedatives mixed with blood thinners. In a pregnant woman, this combination could easily cause miscarriage, internal bleeding, or worse." "How long would it have taken?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Based on the levels in her system, maybe another week or two before serious complications developed. If she'd continued taking what he was giving her." Dr. Foster shook her head. "Let's just say you acted just in time." While Jessica was being treated, Detective Rodriguez filled me in on what the FBI had discovered during their search of the Maplewood Heights house. "Your daughter wasn't exaggerating about the research she found," Rodriguez said, showing me photographs of evidence. Maxwell had detailed plans for staging her death as a car accident, maps of remote mountain roads, research on brake line sabotage, even practice runs timing how long it would take emergency services to reach different locations. The photos showed a level of calculation that made my stomach turn. Handwritten notes about Jessica's daily routines, her driving patterns, her medical condition. Trevor had been studying my daughter like a scientist planning an experiment. But here's the most damning evidence. Rodriguez continued, pulling out a laptop computer. Maxwell kept detailed records of all his previous schemes. We found files on 8 different victims across 4 states, including complete financial records and, in 3 cases, insurance payout documentation. Insurance payouts from the deaths of his victims. The grandmother in Arizona who supposedly fell downstairs. She died 3 days after increasing her life insurance policy at Maxwell's suggestion. The young mother in Colorado who died in the car accident. Same pattern. Policy increase followed by suspicious death within 6 months. The scope of Trevor's crimes was staggering. He wasn't just a financial fraudster. He was a serial killer who specialized in making murder look like accidents. "How many people has he killed?" "We're still investigating, but we suspect at least 5 deaths over the past 6 years. Your daughter would have been number 6. When Jessica was finally released from the hospital, we sat in my kitchen where this nightmare had begun. She looked fragile, but determined, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "Mom, I need to tell you everything," she said, "about how Trevor manipulated me, about the lies I told you, about how I let him convince me that stealing from you was somehow justified." For the next 2 hours, Jessica told me the whole story. How Trevor had targeted her at a coffee shop near the dental office, striking up conversations about her family and her financial situation. How he'd gradually isolated her from friends and coworkers with subtle criticism and manufactured emergencies. How he'd convinced her that I was selfishly hoarding money that should go to her future children. "He made me believe you didn't trust me," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "He said you thought I was irresponsible, and that's why Dad set up the trust fund to keep money away from me until you died." "Jessica, That's not true at all. Your father set up the trust because he wanted to make sure you'd be provided for, but he also wanted you to be mature enough to handle that kind of responsibility. I know that now, but Trevor was so convincing, and I was so angry about being treated like a child when I was 28 years old. He made it seem like taking the money was just claiming what was already mine. The manipulation techniques Trevor had used were textbook psychological abuse. He'd identified Jessica's insecurities about family relationships and financial independence, then exploited them systematically. There's something else, Jessica continued. The marriage ceremony wasn't legal. Trevor told me we were going to Las Vegas for a romantic weekend, but the person who performed the ceremony was his friend, not a real officiant. I found out later when I tried to get copies of our marriage certificate for insurance purposes. So you were never actually married? No, which means the house purchase, the joint accounts, everything was based on fraud. Trevor convinced me to sign papers I thought were marriage-related, but they were actually financial authorizations. This revelation added another layer to the federal case against Trevor. Not only had he committed financial fraud and attempted murder, but he'd also used fake marriage ceremonies to manipulate his victims into signing legal documents. Detective Rodriguez arrived that evening with more updates. Maxwell's been arraigned on preliminary charges, and he's been denied bail. The judge considered him a flight risk and a danger to the community. What happens now? Now we build the strongest possible case. We've got evidence linking him to crimes across multiple states, and we're coordinating with federal prosecutors to ensure he faces the maximum possible penalties. Rodriguez turned to Jessica. Your testimony will be crucial to the prosecution. Are you prepared to testify against him? Jessica straightened her shoulders. Absolutely. I want to make sure he can never do this to another family. There's one more thing, Rodriguez said. We found evidence that Maxwell was planning to expand his operation. He'd been researching other wealthy widows in the area, including detailed background information on at least 12 potential targets. The thought that Trevor might have victimized other families in our community made me furious all over again. How many other daughters might he have manipulated? How many other families might he have destroyed? We need to warn them, I said. Already done. We've contacted everyone on his target list and advised them about potential fraud attempts. Your case probably prevented multiple future victims. Over the following weeks, as Jessica recovered from the poisoning and we worked with federal prosecutors to prepare for trial, more evidence continued to surface. Trevor's laptop contained communications with other criminals' plans for expanding his operation nationally and even research into hiring accomplices. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a document titled Jessica, Final Phase. It detailed exactly how he planned to kill her after the baby was born, including specific methods for making her death appear to be complications from postpartum depression. He was never planning to keep the baby, Rodriguez explained when she showed us the file. The plan was to eliminate Jessica's claim he couldn't care for a newborn as a grieving widower and put the child up for adoption. Then he'd disappear with all the money and start over somewhere else. Jessica and I held each other and cried when we read that document. The baby she was carrying hadn't just been an unexpected complication to Trevor. It had been another obstacle to be disposed of, but we also realized something else. This evidence proved beyond any doubt that Jessica had been a victim, not a co-conspirator. No woman would willingly participate in planning her own murder and the abandonment of her child. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Walsh, assured us that Jessica would receive full immunity in exchange for her cooperation. Mr. Maxwell chose his victim very carefully, Walsh explained. He specifically targeted someone he could manipulate and control. The evidence clearly shows your daughter was coerced through a combination of psychological manipulation, physical abuse, and deliberate drugging. 6 weeks after Trevor's arrest, Jessica moved back in with me temporarily while she recovered her strength and prepared for the baby's arrival. She was working with a therapist to process the trauma of the abuse and slowly rebuilding her confidence and independence. "Mom," she said one evening as we sat in the kitchen folding baby clothes, "I don't think I've properly thanked you for saving my life." "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. That's what mothers do." "No, it's more than that. You could have just reported the theft and had me arrested along with Trevor. Instead, you investigated, you planned, you took risks to save me. Even when you thought I might have betrayed you willingly." I looked at my daughter glowing with health now that the poison was out of her system, her hand resting on her growing belly, where my granddaughter was developing safely. "Jessica, the moment I realized you were in danger, nothing else mattered. Not the money, not the betrayal, nothing. You're my child, and I will always fight for you." The trial was still months away, but we both knew the outcome was inevitable. Trevor had been caught with overwhelming evidence, multiple victims were cooperating with prosecutors, and his own recorded confessions would seal his fate. But more importantly, our family was healing. The trust that had been broken was slowly being rebuilt stronger than before because it was now based on complete honesty rather than naive faith. We'd survived the worst kind of betrayal and manipulation, and we'd emerged victorious. Now it was time to focus on the future and the new life that would soon join our family. The little girl growing inside Jessica would never know the monster who'd tried to destroy her family. She would grow up knowing only love, protection, and the story of how her grandmother and mother fought back and won. 8 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown was packed with victims, family members, law enforcement officers, and media representatives. Trevor's trial had attracted national attention because of the sophisticated nature of his crimes and the number of victims across multiple states. I sat in the front row of the gallery holding my 6-week-old granddaughter Frances, while Jessica sat at the prosecutor's table as the star witness. Frances was perfect, healthy, alert, and completely unaware of the drama surrounding her arrival into the world. Catherine Walsh, the federal prosecutor, had built an airtight case. Over 3 days of testimony, the jury heard from victims across 4 states, FBI agents, financial experts, and medical professionals who detailed Trevor's systematic approach to targeting, manipulating, and eliminating vulnerable people. But it was Jessica's testimony that proved most powerful. "Mr. Maxwell convinced me that my own mother was my enemy." Jessica said, her voice strong and clear as she faced Trevor across the courtroom. "He made me believe that the woman who raised me, who loved me unconditionally, was somehow cheating me out of my rightful inheritance." Trevor sat at the defense table, no longer the charming con man who'd swept my daughter off her feet. He looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his confident smile replaced by the cold stare of someone who'd been caught and knew it. "He isolated me from everyone I cared about," Jessica continued. "He convinced me to quit my job, cut contact with my friends, and lie to my family. When I started to question his plans, he began poisoning me with drugs that could have killed both me and my unborn child." The evidence phase of the trial was devastating for Trevor's defense. Walsh presented bank records showing the systematic theft of funds recordings of Trevor's own voice, detailing his plans to kill Jessica, and physical evidence from his laptop, proving he'd researched and planned multiple murders. The medical testimony was particularly damning. Dr. Foster explained to the jury how the combination of drugs Trevor had been giving Jessica would have caused organ failure within weeks if the poisoning had continued. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Foster said, Mr. Maxwell was essentially conducting a slow-motion murder using medications to gradually weaken the victim while making her death appear to be natural pregnancy complications. Trevor's defense attorney, a public defender who'd been assigned the case after Trevor's assets were frozen, tried to argue that Jessica had been a willing participant in the financial fraud. But the evidence of coercion and abuse was overwhelming. Walsh played recordings of Trevor's voice from the wire I'd worn during our kitchen meeting. The pregnancy was an accident. It complicated everything. Do you know how hard it is to stage a believable accident when someone's pregnant? The jury's faces showed their disgust as they heard Trevor calmly discussing the murder of his pregnant girlfriend, as if it were a business problem to be solved. On the fourth day of trial, Walsh called me to the witness stand. I'd been dreading this moment, but I was ready. "Mrs. Hartwell, tell the jury about your relationship with your daughter before she met the defendant." I described our close relationship, our weekly dinners, Jessica's regular visits and phone calls. I painted a picture of a loving, trusting family relationship that Trevor had systematically destroyed. "When you first discovered the theft, what was your primary concern?" "My daughter's safety. The money was important, but I could replace money. I couldn't replace Jessica." Walsh walked me through the investigation, the discovery of Trevor's real identity, and the decision to work with the FBI to build a case against him. "Were you afraid of confronting the defendant?" "Absolutely. But I was more afraid of what would happen to Jessica if I didn't act. She was pregnant, being poisoned, and in mortal danger. Fear wasn't a luxury I could afford." Trevor's attorney tried to suggest during cross-examination that I'd been motivated by anger over the stolen money rather than concern for Jessica's welfare. "Mrs. Hartwell, isn't it true that you were primarily interested in recovering your financial assets?" I looked directly at Trevor as I answered. "Sir, if my daughter's safety had required me to give him every penny I had in the world, I would have done it gladly. Money can be replaced. My daughter and granddaughter cannot." The closing arguments were powerful. Walsh summarized the evidence methodically, showing the jury how Trevor's crimes fit a clear pattern of targeting vulnerable women, manipulating them into stealing from their families, then murdering them to cover his tracks. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Robert Maxwell is a predator who views human beings as disposable resources to be exploited for profit. He has killed at least 5 people that we know of, and he would have killed Jessica Hartwell and her unborn child if not for the courage and determination of Jessica's mother. Trevor's attorney made a half-hearted attempt to argue for leniency, claiming his client had mental health issues and a troubled childhood. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and the pattern of calculated, premeditated crimes too clear. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. "Guilty on all counts." The words rang through the courtroom like a bell. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit murder, domestic violence, elder abuse. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Judge Margaret Harrison scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, but she made her position clear during post-verdict comments. "Mr. Maxwell, you have been convicted of some of the most heinous crimes I have seen in 20 years on the federal bench. You systematically targeted vulnerable people, destroyed families, and ended lives for nothing more than financial gain. The court will consider the full range of sentencing options available under federal guidelines." On sentencing day, the courtroom was again packed. Victim impact statements were read from families across 4 states whose loved ones had been murdered by Trevor. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up holding baby Francis and looked directly at the man who'd tried to destroy my family. "Trevor Maxwell, you thought you were smarter than everyone around you. You thought you could manipulate a grieving daughter and a trusting mother. You thought you could commit murder and get away with it. But you made one crucial mistake." I paused, shifting Francis to my other arm. "You underestimated the power of a mother's love. You thought I was a helpless old woman who'd hand over her life savings without a fight. Instead, you discovered that when you threaten someone's child, you awaken a force you cannot control and cannot defeat. Trevor stared at me with undisguised hatred, but I felt only pity for him. He'd wasted his life destroying others, and now he would spend whatever years remained to him in a federal penitentiary. Judge Harrison sentenced Trevor to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, followed by lifetime supervised probation. She also ordered him to pay full restitution to all his victims, though his assets had already been seized and distributed. Mr. Maxwell, your crimes represent a betrayal of the basic trust that holds families and communities together. You will have many years to contemplate the lives you destroyed and the families you tore apart. As Trevor was led away in shackles, he looked back once at Jessica and me, but there was no triumph in his eyes anymore, just the hollow stare of someone who'd gambled everything and lost completely. Outside the courthouse, Detective Rodriguez congratulated Jessica and me on our courage throughout the investigation and trial. You two probably saved a dozen other families from going through what you experienced, she said. Maxwell had a target list, and he was planning to expand his operation nationally. That evening, Jessica and I sat in our kitchen where this nightmare had begun almost a year ago. Frances was sleeping peacefully in her carrier, completely unaware of the evil that had threatened her before she was even born. Mom, do you think Dad would be proud of how we handled this? I looked at Frank's photograph on the mantle, then at the beautiful granddaughter he'd never get to meet. Baby girl, your father spent his life teaching us to be strong, to protect each other, and to never let bullies win. I think he's looking down at us right now with the biggest smile imaginable. Justice had been served, but more importantly, our family had survived. We'd been tested in ways I'd never imagined possible, but we'd emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. The money had been recovered, the criminal was behind bars, and baby Frances would grow up in a world where her family's love had triumphed over evil. It was everything Frank would have wanted for his girls. 2 years have passed since that terrible morning when I discovered the missing money and learned my daughter's true situation. As I sit here today watching 3-year-old Frances play in the backyard of our new home, it's hard to believe how much our lives have changed. The house in Maplewood Heights that Trevor bought with our stolen money was seized by federal authorities and sold at auction. Jessica and I used her inheritance from Frank, properly accessed this time to buy a smaller but comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood with excellent schools. Frances has her own room decorated with pictures of the grandfather she'll never meet, but whose love surrounds her every day. Jessica has thrived in ways I never expected. After the trauma of her experience with Trevor, she discovered a strength and purpose she'd never known she possessed. She completed a degree in computer security and now works with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit as a consultant helping other families recognize and escape from sophisticated scams. Mom, Jessica said last week as we watched Frances chase butterflies in the garden. I never thought I'd say this, but going through that nightmare with Trevor was the best thing that ever happened to me. How can you say that, sweetheart? Because it showed me what I'm really made of. Before Trevor, I was drifting through life working a job I didn't love, letting other people make decisions for me. He thought he could control me because I seemed weak and dependent. She paused, watching Frances discover a ladybug on a flower petal. But when it mattered most, when my baby's life was at stake, I found the courage to fight back. Dad always said I was stronger than I knew. It just took a crisis to prove it. Jessica's work with the FBI has led to the identification and prosecution of 3 other criminals operating similar schemes across the country. Her insights into the psychological manipulation techniques used by financial predators have helped law enforcement agencies develop better strategies for catching these criminals and protecting their victims. She's also started a support group for victims of financial fraud and domestic abuse. Every month, a dozen women gather in our living room to share their stories, offer each other encouragement, and work toward healing. Many of them are elderly women who were targeted specifically because they seemed vulnerable and isolated. The thing people don't understand about these predators, Jessica often tells the support group, is that they're experts at finding your emotional vulnerabilities and exploiting them. They make you feel special and loved while they're systematically destroying your life. As for Trevor, he's serving his sentence in a federal prison in Colorado. He'll be eligible for supervised release when he's 67 years old, assuming he lives that long and demonstrates genuine rehabilitation. Several of his fellow inmates have family members who were victims of financial fraud, and Trevor has found prison to be a much less comfortable environment than he expected. I've received 2 letters from him over the past year, both attempting to justify his actions and blame his victims for being naive and trusting. I threw both letters away without finishing them. Trevor Maxwell has taken enough of my family's time and energy. He doesn't deserve any more. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. When federal authorities seized Trevor's assets, they discovered he'd been far more successful in his criminal career than anyone realized. Hidden accounts contained money stolen from dozens of victims over nearly a decade. After legal fees and administrative costs, Jessica and I received not only our original money back, but also a substantial additional sum from the Criminal Forfeiture Fund. We used some of that money to establish the Frank Hartwell Foundation, which provides financial assistance to families who've been victimized by elder fraud. The foundation also funds educational programs to help seniors recognize and avoid financial scams. Patricia Mills, our estate attorney, helped us restructure Frank's trust fund with additional protections and safeguards. Frances will inherit when she turns 30, but the new setup includes provisions for education health care and other legitimate expenses before then. More importantly, we've built in multiple layers of verification to prevent any future fraud attempts. Frances is growing up surrounded by love security and the knowledge that her family fought for her before she was even born. She's a bright, curious child who loves books, music, and helping her mother tend the vegetable garden. She calls me Gigi and insists on helping me bake cookies every Sunday afternoon. Last month, Frances asked me why she doesn't have a daddy like some of the other children at her preschool. Well, sweetheart, I told her, your mommy and I decided you needed extra love from your family instead. Some children have mommies and daddies. You have a mommy and a Gigi who love you more than all the stars in the sky.
And Grandpa Frank in heaven?
Frances added seriously. Mommy showed me his picture.
That's right, baby. Grandpa Frank is watching over all of us.
The experience taught me valuable lessons about trust family and the difference between being naive and being loving. I learned that protecting the people you care about sometimes means being willing to investigate, confront difficult truths, and take calculated risks. I also learned that real strength often comes disguised as vulnerability. Trevor saw Jessica as weak because she was trusting and caring. He saw me as an easy target because I was elderly and recently widowed. What he failed to recognize was that people who love deeply also fight fiercely when that love is threatened. The support group Jessica started has expanded into a network of 3 groups meeting across our county. I often speak at these meetings sharing our story and encouraging other families to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. The most important thing to remember, I tell them, is that predators count on our shame and isolation to keep us from seeking help. They want us to believe we're the only ones who've been fooled, that we're too embarrassed to admit what's happening. But the truth is, these criminals are professionals. They study human psychology, they practice their techniques, and they're very good at what they do. Being deceived by an expert manipulator isn't a sign of stupidity or weakness. It's simply evidence that you have normal human emotions that someone chose to exploit. Detective Rodriguez has become a close family friend. She often joins us for Sunday dinners and delights in watching Frances grow and develop. Rodriguez was recently promoted to head the Financial Crimes Unit, largely based on the success of Trevor's prosecution and the network of related cases it helped solve. "You know what I learned from working with your family," Rodriguez told me recently. "Law enforcement is important, but the real heroes in these cases are the families who refuse to give up on each other." 6 months ago, I received a phone call that brought our story full circle. A woman in Oregon named Margaret Thompson had read about our case in a news article and recognized similarities to her own situation. Her adult son had married a woman who was gradually isolating him from family and convincing him to make increasingly questionable financial decisions. "I found your foundation's website," Margaret said. "My son thinks I'm being paranoid, but everything you described about Trevor's manipulation tactics sounds exactly like what's happening to my family." Jessica and I worked with Detective Rodriguez to connect Margaret with law enforcement in Oregon. Within 3 weeks, investigators had uncovered evidence that her son's wife was part of a criminal organization that specifically targeted young men from wealthy families. Margaret's son was rescued before any permanent damage was done, and his wife was arrested along with 5 accomplices. The case is still proceeding through the courts, but Margaret's family has been reunited and their assets protected. "I can never thank you enough for sharing your story," Margaret wrote in a letter. "If you hadn't been brave enough to speak out publicly about what happened, my son might have become another victim." Stories like Margaret's remind me why it's important to keep talking about financial elder abuse and family manipulation. These crimes thrive in silence and secrecy. The more we discuss them openly, the harder it becomes for predators to operate. This spring, I'll be turning 75, and Jessica is planning a big celebration with our extended family and friends. Frances is excited about helping plan Gigi's special day and has already announced her intention to bake me a cake with lots and lots of frosting. As I think about the future, I'm filled with gratitude rather than fear. Yes, our family experienced something terrible, but we survived it together and emerged stronger than before. Frances will grow up knowing that her mother and grandmother are fighters who will never let anything harm her. Jessica has started dating again carefully and with the wisdom that comes from experience. She's in no rush to remarry, but she's open to finding the right person when the time comes. Most importantly, she's learned to trust her own instincts and maintain her independence regardless of what relationships develop. "I'll never again let someone convince me that my family doesn't have my best interests at heart," she told me recently. "What we went through with Trevor taught me that real love doesn't require you to lie to or steal from the people who care about you." The scars from our experience with Trevor will probably never completely disappear, but they've become a source of strength rather than shame. We know what we're capable of when our family is threatened. We know we can trust each other completely. And we know that love, courage, and determination can overcome even the most sophisticated evil. As I watch Frances playing in the garden where her grandfather once grew prize-winning tomatoes, I'm reminded that families are like gardens. They require care, attention, and protection from destructive forces. But with proper nurturing, they produce beauty, sustenance, and joy that can last for generations. Frank would be so proud of the women his girls have become. Jessica transformed from a victim into an advocate who's helping other families avoid the trap she fell into. Frances is growing up surrounded by examples of strength, courage, and unconditional love. And I discovered that widowhood didn't make me helpless. It made me fierce. Our story isn't just about surviving financial fraud or escaping from a dangerous criminal. It's about the power of family bonds to overcome any challenge when those bonds are based on genuine love, honest communication, and the willingness to fight for each other no matter what the cost. To anyone listening who might be dealing with something similar in their own family, I want you to remember this trust. Your instincts ask difficult questions and never be afraid to seek help when something feels wrong. The people who truly love you will welcome your questions and concerns. The people who get angry when you ask questions are the ones you need to worry about. Most importantly, remember that it's never too late to fight back. Whether you're 28 like Jessica was or 73 like I was when this began, you have more strength and courage than you realize. Sometimes it just takes a crisis to reveal what you're really made of. Family isn't just about blood relationships or legal documents. It's about the people who will stand by you when everything goes wrong, who will fight for you when you can't fight for yourself, and who will never stop believing in your worth and dignity no matter what mistakes you might make. That's the lesson Trevor Maxwell never learned, and it's why he ultimately failed. He thought family bonds were weaknesses to be exploited. Instead, he discovered they're the strongest force in the human experience. Frances just ran up to me with a handful of dandelions she's picked for a bouquet. In her innocent eyes, they're as beautiful as roses from the finest garden. She's right, of course. Love transforms everything it touches, even the simplest gifts. Gigi, she says, these are for you because you're the best Gigi in the whole world. Thank you, sweetheart. They're absolutely perfect. And they are. Just like this life we've built together from the ashes of betrayal and fear. Just like the family that emerged stronger from its greatest test. Just like the future that stretches ahead of us bright with possibility and protected by love. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love, even when it felt scary or uncertain? How did you find the courage to do what needed to be done? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for taking this journey with me and for listening to our story. If it helps even one family recognize the warning signs of financial predators or domestic manipulation, then sharing these painful memories will have been worthwhile. Please remember to like this video if our story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories of families overcoming impossible challenges, and share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of family love to triumph over evil. Until next time, hold your loved ones close and never underestimate the strength you carry within you. Sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary courage when the people they love are in danger. Bless you all, and remember, family always wins when love leads the way.